So today we're going to talk about functional chiropractic neurology.
Mm-hmm.
And I said functional because a lot of people today are calling it functional neurology,
exactly.
but it had its genesis by Dr. Fred Carrick. And today, these doctors are referred to as board certified chiropractic neurologists. And I want to emphasize that. I'm Dr. Martin Rutherford. I am a chiropractor since 1979. I am also a certified functional medicine practitioner who was dabbling in non-Carrick functional medicine prior to being joined by
Dr. Randall Gates. I'm a board certified chiropractic neurologist as well as being a chiropractor.
And that was one of the best days of this practice when Dr. Gates brought his skill and his board certified chiropractic neurology discipline to our office. And it allowed us to meld our practices and allowed us to develop a chronic pain practice with a heavy emphasis on many neurological problems that respond very well consistently to the methods of the discipline of chiropractic neurology. The title of this, I believe, was something along the lines of chiropractic neurology, legitimate discipline or pseudoscience. We can tell you this is not a pseudoscience based on our everyday experience. Myself, I had a lot of problems relative to fibromyalgia, stress mechanisms, things of that nature. I was fortunate enough to see an article on fibromyalgia written by a board certified chiropractic neurologist in Appleton, Wisconsin. Dr. Johnson, I'm talking about you, Dr. Mike Johnson in Appleton, Wisconsin. I didn't go to him, but he sent me materials that allowed me to start to apply those materials to myself, and I started to feel better. In fact, the very first patient that I tried it on was a non-believer, and he was from Denver, and he was a consultant of mine, and I treated him, and we had some fun with it. And he called me 2 days later and said, I haven't had to take my sinus medications in 2 days. His stress levels went down and so on and so forth. So in our world, it's not even an issue as to whether it's or not, but we understand that to a lot of you out there, particularly you medical students who have taken to attack online on chiropractic neurologists or other doctors who just are feeling like somebody's attacking you. Nobody's attacking you. Nobody's trying to do your profession. Neurologists, we're not trying to do your profession. This is a different approach to a brain problem that has substantial validity and substantial research behind it for those of you who have researched it incorrectly. So we're going to go through that. Dr. Gates is more likely going to do the lion's share of this. I don't know that this is a big audience presentation, but if it isn't, it should be, because the things that occur in our office and some of the more well-trained chiropractic neurologists around the country are pretty amazing. And it's a very, very organized, very disciplined science based on, I would argue, thousands of peer-reviewed reference journals relative to the bits and pieces that have come together to allow this to happen. I know that Dr. Gates is going to give credit to Dr. Frederick Carrick, who is a brilliant man. But Dr. Carrick, I'm sure you'll appreciate if I say this, but maybe not the most diplomatic person on planet Earth, giving fire to some people to criticize him. But there's no criticizing his brilliance, and there's no criticizing him putting this discipline together. Now, I practiced aspects of this before Dr. Gates got here. I don't do any of it anymore because it is a very sophisticated discipline if applied correctly, and it can be applied across the board to a stunning number of neurological problems. So, quackery, pseudoscience. This is a board certified chiropractic neurologist. Some people are today referring to it as functional neurology. I'm gonna leave it to you now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those claims are based in the fact that we have the prefix of chiropractic before neurologist. So basically, there's just a lot of stigma with being a chiropractor. I knew it going into the profession. I'm sure you knew it.
I've been in it since 1979.
Exactly.
It's changed a lot. It's
the
changed a lot. Back to when, even at 79, people came to us as a last resort. They were freaking out, even when I would do the exam.
Worried that you'd break their neck.
Yeah, I'd put my hand on the person's neck to do an exam just to check their neck, and they'd start shaking. So, you know, you're not going to hurt me. You're not going to hurt. And then after a while, the patient would start feeling better, and they'd say, "How come everybody thinks you guys are so bad?" I mean, I went through that whole thing. We don't have that very much anymore. But yeah, the thing being, you put chiropractic in front of something, and everybody's thinking, okay, and I've had it. I have had it. That's not true. I have had people come in here when I'm screening them for our procedures. We work together on a lot of chronic pain cases, and I will have a handful say, this isn't about cracking my neck, is it? Or is it? No disrespect to the chiropractors out there, but that's what people say to me. So, so yeah.
Exactly. So because we're a chiropractor, we're immediately a quack, and that's that is some of the notions out there that are discussed on the internet relative to this topic of chiropractic neurology, which I will come out and say, you know, that Dr. Carrick created. Dr. Carrick is brilliant, as we discussed, and we'll get into his brilliance and how he basically took our profession in this direction. But anyways, that being said, I think we also need to assess the issue of chiropractic specialties. There's a lot of discussion out there about why are there chiropractic radiologists? Why do you need a chiropractic neurologist?
Yeah, and are they just MD wannabes and stuff like that?
Well, really that came out of the fact, which was substantiated by the Supreme Court back in 1987, where it was shown that the American Medical Association, we're not trying to get out there, but I mean, this has to be talked about. The American Medical Association basically had these, how would you say it? These criteria on their doctors to where if they accepted a referral from a chiropractor, they could potentially lose their license.
It was an antitrust suit.
Yeah,
it was an antitrust. There was an antitrust suit. Very simply, the medical profession was proven in the Supreme Court that they were taking steps to make sure that nobody would refer to chiropractors. They had they had acquaintances in newspapers and magazines, and every now and then, it still happens, every now and then they'll float something out there that says chiropractic manipulation causes strokes or something like that. And this is embarrassing. I can't remember the name of the suit.
The Wilkes suit.
The Wilkes suit, WILKS, the Wilkes suit. Thank you. And we won that suit, showing that there was years from like the 60s and 50s all the way up until 87 that they were just trying to eliminate us as a profession because they tried to get us to become part of them as chiropractors. We said, no, we're going to stay clean. We're going to stay non-drug. We're going to do all that type of stuff. So,
right.
So that's the baseline.
And so from that, then chiropractors, because they couldn't always refer to, let's say, a radiologist to get an opinion on an x-ray, or they couldn't refer to a neurologist to get an opinion on an issue. In chiropractic, we started our own residencies, and Dr. Carrick started really the chiropractic neurology residency. It's underpinnings and really understanding how chiropractic works. So when chiropractic was started back in the early 1900s, the prevailing notion at that time was that our nervous system was this gel-like substance transmitting electrical impulses all throughout the body. And it made sense that if a vertebra at the top part of the neck was out of place, maybe that was impinging on that gelatinous substance in the transmission of those impulses. And therefore, if you could adjust that bone and get it right into its proper alignment, that the condition would improve. And at that time, B.J. Palmer saw some pretty amazing changes with his application, which was a chiropractic adjustment.
Another controversial guy, of course.
Of course. And so lots of times when people are talking about chiropractic today, they talk about B.J. Palmer, and this is what he thought. And his dad, D.D. Palmer, was an energy healer and all these sorts of things, which some chiropractors still practice that way.
But Palmer was extraordinarily scientific.
Extraordinarily.
Based on the tools he had to work with back in the 20s and 30s.
And at that time, he was the first person to take a spinal x-ray in North America.
That's right.
So I think that's pretty fascinating. He had rehabilitative equipment in his in his clinical practice. He had lab practices in
It is argued that he invented the universal gym.
Right.
And there's pictures of him showing before anybody else had it.
And he talked to people about diet and nutrition. And so it goes on and on and on. Well, it wasn't until 1927. So as you said, the tools he had at that time. And he was doing a lot of this research in the teens, the 20s, and the 30s. 1927, Ramon San Diego Cajal comes out with a study basically showing that the nervous system is made up of little cells called neurons, and that they transmit information from one to another. There's little synapses between these cells and how they send little chemicals to one another to tell each other information. That was really not readily accepted until the late 1930s. So most of B.J. Palmer's research was done before that. And so it's no surprise that that's kind of the chiropractic philosophy and the chiropractic theory. And it really was not until Dr. Carrick came along where he started looking at the modern neuroscience of that time, saying, well, how does a chiropractic adjustment work? Let's just say we all now know that chiropractic works for low back pain, just as an example. Even Dr. Sanjay Gupta, CNN, approves chiropractic for back pain and neck pain as long as you get x-rays to make sure that there's no fractures before.
Right.
That's what I remember him saying. But basically, if we adjust the bone, how does that improve pain? And Dr. Carrick really started explaining that it's a neurologic mechanism. It's not as much just a joint being out of place. The fact that when we adjust a joint, there are little receptors in that joint that send impulses into the spinal cord that shut off the pain signals. And from that, he started wondering, at least from what I got from his description, well, if it's affecting the spinal cord, could it be affecting the pathways that go up into the brain? And then from that, at that time, there are a lot of criticisms online about neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity was proven not to work clinically 20 years ago. I don't know where they got that, except from studies on Alzheimer's disease.
The non-medical students out there who are tuning into Bashas may not know what neuroplasticity is.
So neuroplasticity is a concept that was really...
By the way, chiropractic students are the same way. We all think we know everything when we're in medical school.
That's a good point.
And then we get out. In chiropractic college, I got out and I was telling my godfather, who'd been a chiropractor for 30 years, how to run his practice and all the new stuff that was going on. He decided it probably wasn't a good idea that we worked together. So I bash you guys like kind of tongue in cheek, but I include all professional students in there. It's a whole different world once you get out and start actually putting yourself on the line there.
Yeah, exactly. So neuroplasticity is a term that was discussed through the 1960s, 50s, but really gained a lot of traction with Dr. Eric Kandel. So there are others before him that were working on this, but Donald Hebb. But basically, Kandel showed how our brain learns, how the nervous system learns. And from that, Dr. Kandel, he's one of the heads of neuroscience at Columbia University. He has written the gold standard textbook in neuroscience called Principles of Neuroscience, which all chiropractic neurologists have to be well versed in. And he showed how our brain can improve. It used to be thought that the brain was this inanimate object that once you're 18, it doesn't change and it just degenerates over that time. If you have a brain injury or anything happen to it, basically you're out of luck. It is what it is.
I can relate to that.
And so Dr. Kandel started showing
I've had
studies,
and that's why I said that.
And from Dr. Kandel, he's there's just a field of research now talking about how the brain changes, how the brain rewires itself, how the brain learns, all these different phenomena. And so Dr. Carrick looked at that and said, well, if this chiropractic adjustment may be sending impulses up into the brain, what effects does that have? And that's his early research. And people go back and they criticize it. But really, I think it's some pretty phenomenal research, frankly, where he showed that maybe we have some changes in brain function. Not maybe, but we do have some changes in brain function, adjusting one side of the neck versus another side of the neck.
Well, they go all the way back to B.J. Palmer.
Okay,
they go all the way back to B.J. Palmer, who was he wasn't the founder of chiropractic, as Dr. Gates said. And the reason we're emphasizing this is people say, oh, chiropractic neurology, they do all these subspecialties, they just want to be doctors. No. This is a very scientific path that has been traveled in the chiropractic neurology field. And it started when Dr. Palmer started to realize that when he adjusted somebody's neck on one side, and he had a very interesting way of evaluating it. I'm not going to get into it, but he had a very specific way of evaluating which side of the neck should be adjusted. And he would adjust people and their balance would get better. Not everybody. Their vertigo would get better. Not everybody. I had a patient, and I did this technique for a while, and I had a patient who was on all kinds of psych meds, started adjusting her on the atlas on one side, and her psychological problems went away because there was a synchronization that was occurring in the brain that Dr. Palmer couldn't prove at that time. He just knew that it was happening. Oh, by the way, this guy adjusted like 4 presidents. You have people coming to him from all over the world. I mean, he was an amazing guy. I could go on for him for like 6
Ronald Reagan worked for him.
Ronald Reagan worked for him, yeah, as his first DJ in a radio station, first radio station. It was a very interesting guy. All done to promote this, all done to raise money to promote his school so that he could refine these principles that have become the basis of what Dr. Carrick started to go on today. And so, but the bottom line was that there was this chiropractic mystique, which is no longer a mystique, except the people who are still promoting the original, almost religious philosophy of it. And I apologize to you guys, but you got to get with the new science, okay? But he would adjust on one side. He would see significant changes. And now we know that it probably had to do with, and I'll let you describe the path. Not that I don't know about the cerebellum and all that kind of stuff, but I'll let you go into that. But that's really.
Exactly. So basically 90% of the receptors in your body, I'm not talking your eye or your ear, are approximately located right here in the upper cervical spine. So, and some of those receptors have direct connection to the cerebellum. And so if we adjust this area, there's a possibility that we can affect how the cerebellum, which is the balance center in the brain, that's associated with dizziness conditions.
Because as you said, Dr. Carrick reasoned that when you did that manipulation, and we don't even use that much manipulation here in these cases, and Dr. Gates will take you forward on that. But that when he understood that when you adjusted this, that there was a probable input, a neurological input to the brain. Is that anything to be isn't that pretty much verified at this point in time?
Yeah,
I mean, I've read that all over the place.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they do.
So this is not like.
No, this is not an
a theory at this point.
I mean, we know that the adjustment affects the nervous system. We know those pathways go up into the brain.
Okay. So bring us forward again.
Okay, so basically from there, then Dr. Carrick started looking at, well, if the adjustment does this, are there potentially other exercises that we can facilitate with the adjustment or without the adjustment in a given situation? Stimulations, brain-based exercises. And it's really interesting. He made a comment in one of the seminars I was at. He said, you know, if I tell somebody to do bicep curls and their bicep gets better, then it's just placebo. Which I thought was just a great statement because it's really true. I mean, we know that we can give the brain exercises and we can actually improve how the brain functions. We can change maps in the brain. So all you need to know that we have a visual coordinate system where our visual environment is coded in our brain, and that map can change with certain neurological conditions, and you can actually remap it. That's been shown by Lee and Z. Well, Dr. Carrick is just doing all this stuff. You know, people say there's no research behind what you do. Everything we do is research-based. Everything we got is from the medical profession and the neuroscience profession. Everything. And so it's all your own information.
To go back to why that was so funny.
It's
so funny. The placebo thing is
right.
What they say, oh, it's placebo.
It's placebo.
So Sidney Crosby, who's one of the most famous hockey players ever in the history of hockey, gets a concussion, and he's out for 9 months going to all the top neurologists in the world, using their gold standard
methods. And this is no denigration on that.
It's not. It's not. We're just saying that we said exactly. This is non-drug. This is not. We're advanced in the non-drug field. So then Cosby comes to Carrick. Carrick uses a machine that was only being used where
Mayo Clinic and NASA.
To along with many of the methods that Dr. Gates talked about and more, and re-stimulates this hockey player's brain to the point where he gets back on the hockey ice
like in a couple of months.
In a couple of months. After 9 months of getting things saying we're getting worse. And Dr. Carrick probably used that analogy because they said, well, this stuff can cause a placebo effect. And it's like, yeah, placebo effect after 9 months of the gold standard treatment in the current neurological model, and then in a couple of months having him completely back to playing National League hockey. He's an all-star. At the time, he was the best player in the world.
Right.
And so that's why Dr. Carrick said, oh, this is probably a placebo effect if I'm doing this.
Right.
So,
yeah. And I loved his comment. There's
right.
an ABC Nightline news article on him, or news show on him. And one of the interviewers said, so a lot of people just say you're just inducing placebo with these patients. He said, well, then I'm awfully good at inducing placebo because we see some really great results. And it's more than 33%, which you'd
and the same thing has been said about chiropractic.
Exactly. And
Weird.
until
And
finally chiropractic was legitimized as helping pain, spine pain. It took decades to show that.
Yeah. I've been accused of talking people into getting better. And I said, if that were true, so be it. But that's not it. There's a huge science behind chiropractic, and that science laid the base for chiropractic neurology. Why don't you continue on with this?
And then we have the whole issue, just like it took decades to illustrate that chiropractic helps spine pain. The amount of research dollars, I don't think the average American or even student out there has any grasp on how much money it takes to validate a hypothesis on something incredibly, seemingly infinitesimal. So basically, the money is just not dedicated for this type of research to chiropractic neurologists. And I wanted to talk about graduate medical education. So one of the criticisms of chiropractic neurology is that our board certification process is not a 4-year in-hospital residency. Rather, it's done through seminars, and you have to basically do it on your own. However, a lot of people say, well, you can just go to a seminar and get this title. No, you cannot. I mean, I'm not the brightest guy on the planet, but I don't think I'm a dummy either. And it took me upwards of 4 years of rigorous study in every spare moment I had and every basically moment of the day to become a board certified chiropractic neurologist. Because that examination, just so you know, is certified by an agency that accredits your pharmacists and their advanced certifications, your dentists, your optometrists, your nurse practitioners, who a lot of you are seeing when you go to see your doctor. So I think most of us are comfortable with those allied health professionals.
Yeah.
And the American Chiropractic Neurology Board has achieved that level of accreditation, which means that the examination that a board certified chiropractic neurologist has to go through, and if they pass, it means that they're accredited to a very, very high level.
How many people do you think have gone through the board, through Carrick's program?
Through his program?
3,000,
4,000, something like that.
How many people are board certified chiropractic?
It's somewhere around 400. That's the number.
400
in the world.
Okay.
Not just the United States.
And I dabbled in it for a year. I didn't think I was dabbling at the time, and I have been considering going back to get a board certified functional neurology diplomate certification. I think Dr. Gates just made my decision that I may not be doing that based on what he just did, because he is a little bit smarter than the average bear, and he's a very good student in addition to being an excellent clinician. So this is not, so I would say this, and I'm not saying this to take anybody off, but if this interests anybody as far as further study and or the types of things that we're doing here relative to the neurological aspect of our chronic pain practice, dizziness, vertigo, bounce, post-stroke, post-concussion, if you're interested in that, either as a student or as a patient, you should probably consider only calling a board certified trained chiropractic neurologist. I'm not saying that as a sales pitch. I'm just telling you, you can get this stuff online. There are physical therapists that are now being taught little bits and pieces of this relative to vertigo and relative to bounce issues. You need to know this stuff. You need to know the brain. You need to know when to stimulate a specific area. You will need to know when to specifically stimulate an adjacent area. You need to know when to calm a brain down. You need to know which exercises work better than others for each individual type of a patient. You need to be able to do a hell of a neurological exam to figure that out and utilize all the tools that are available to you, including some of the ones that I don't even know this. Is Dr. Carrick the one that started utilizing the different visual tools that you use and the brain mapping and all that type of stuff?
Absolutely.
Okay. And I always assumed that, but because I'd never seen it anywhere else. And I've had several friends who are neurologists. In fact, I had a neurologist who worked here prior to Dr. Gates. And I can tell you, not against neurologists, it's just two different disciplines. They are not the same discipline. They are night and day. This is about function. This is about finding out what happened to your brain. And if it's not pathology, if it's not a tumor, if it's not a neuroma, if it's not a serous, if it's not something like that, which it isn't most of the time in these cases that we see, it is about changing function. And you can't change function unless you know the brain, like majorly know the brain. And if you do that exquisite neurological exam that I was referring to, and it is pathology, you're gonna have a pretty good idea that it might be pathology. And then what are you gonna do?
You refer.
He's going to refer to the neurologist or to the neurosurgeon
or to get an MRI, and then they go to the neurosurgeon. I mean, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that was really well put. And so basically, when I was going
I've been watching this for 5 years now.
Let's just say I had a close friend when I was going through chiropractic school. He was going through medical school and also getting a PhD in neuroscience and looking at going into medical neurology. And really, we would talk a lot about some of the overlap and the differences in what we were doing. And just as you said, when I was learning neurology as taught by Dr. Carrick in his teaching paradigm, you have to learn the brain and the nervous system as a vehicle to change it without drugs and surgery. So how do you do that? You have to learn all these rehabilitation exercises. You have to learn the acute anatomy and circuitry to think, well, if I do this, how would that affect this area of the brain? And
some of you would know that
effect.
As circuitry.
Sorry, I said circuitry.
Yeah.
Sorry, circuitry. And it would have a collateral effect in another area of the brain. Whereas the medical professionals looking at it, well, how can we give this person a drug? The similarity is such that the anatomy is the same for both of us. The diagnosis is the same for both of us. So one of the cardinal features and important factors that the American Chiropractic Neurology Board facilitates is that board certified chiropractic neurologists are trained to diagnose. That's why Dr. Rutherford is saying see a board certified chiropractic neurologist, because I would agree. I mean, you have to be trained to that level to have the potential to have somebody coming in with vertigo to know whether or not they need an MRI or they don't need an MRI.
Yeah,
that's
people
really,
who are
really
not board
important.
certified either couldn't pass the test or they passed the test and weren't successful in what they were doing, so they let their things lapse.
Mm-hmm. Or they don't have enough training yet.
Or they don't have enough training yet. So these 400 people have been trained in the way that Dr. Gates is describing to you and certified by a certifying agency that is highly credible.
Yeah. It's the National Commission for Certifying Agencies. Look it up. Look who else they certified.
Yeah.
And, the other argument relative to our, we don't have 4 years of hospital training. Well,
you don't need 4 years of hospital training.
I was at the American Academy of Neurology conference. I had the privilege of being there in 2013. This
2 years ago.
Yeah. It was 2 years ago and this coming May. So I was there and there was a discussion that I went to regarding graduate medical education. They were talking about this relative to Obamacare. Aside from the neurologists at this convention, like 8,000 of them.
I was just going to say, this was the biggest neurological convention.
Yeah, people from all over the world.
All over the world.
They were, the ones practicing here in the US were rather scared about reimbursements being cut through the changes in our new Affordable Care Act. But they're also talking about changes in graduate medical education. What that means is that when a student graduates from medical school, they go to a residency and the government basically pays for them to go through their residency. The medical student lots of times will pay themselves to go through medical school, which is not cheap. Many of them come out of school with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt.
Yeah.
But then the graduate medical education is paid for by the government, and the government is looking to cut back $11 billion in graduate medical education over the next 10 years. And if you go to, I think it's savegraduatemedicaleducation.org, they have some great statistics up there where they talk about how 528 medical students this year in this country did not place for a residency. So they couldn't even get a residency. They're graduating from medical school, they can't get a residency, and then they can't even practice or do anything. Pretty interesting. And that number they anticipate is only going to grow over the coming years. It costs $145,000 per year to train a U.S. resident on average. That's a lot of money.
Right.
And so in chiropractic, we don't have the infrastructure to do that, and we don't have the graduate
Well, frankly,
education
I think it takes
to
that
put
long.
people through a 4-year neurology residency. We just don't have the government funds. If you want to give them to us, we would love to set that up.
And not to be controversial, but I absolutely am certain that it takes that long because a lot of people make a lot of money off of making these kids go 4 years.
That's also true. Some medical
Just
students,
take out a little
some
bit of the
medical
common
doctors
sense basics here.
I've talked to, PhD students, they describe it as a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
So basically, it's cheap labor to facilitate.
So they have this cheap labor going through the hospitals, and the hospitals are making money, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And so when people say, so I want to bring that back to where Dr. Gates started. When people say, well, you've had 350 hours, and actually, as Dr. Gates said, if Dr. Gates has to study every day for 4 years, I am not even going to try to do my functional neurology thing. But I had somebody online, and I don't know if this is true, but there was somebody online that says they think it takes 15,000 hours by the time you study and so on and so forth to get
a PhD,
or something like that. Whether that's true or not, I'm sure it's a lot of hours. Okay, and just because that person's not going to a residency and so forth, it really doesn't matter. Frankly, that residency is primarily aimed towards, again, pathology. It's aimed towards surgeries. It's aimed towards tumors. It's aimed towards a lot of things. It's aimed towards medication. We put an emphasis in the description of what we were going to talk about when we said that we are ahead of the cutting. We're light years ahead of the cutting edge brain rehab relative to, thanks to Dr. Carrick, relative to non-drug and non-surgical solutions for these types of problems. And it's amazing. The reason we have married together is because the brain responds to these treatments a lot better when the environment is excellent. And so if a person's brain neurons, if their brain cells have a good oxygen supply, of which how many things could screw up your oxygen supply? Like everything: pollution, smoking, stress, inflammation, all kinds of things. Good blood sugar supply, which your brain needs proper blood sugar. If it has a lack of inflammation, and if it has all of that, then the stimulation that it requires becomes much more effective. Mm-hmm. And so we married these two things together. I understand Dr. Carrick is embracing the nutritional aspects of things a lot more than maybe he used to, and that just makes total sense. I know we have seen it. It's a remarkable marriage of disciplines relative to working with chronic pain, chronic conditions, but specifically with the brain and neurological work. I mean, I have seen Dr. Gates's work bring a young girl who had reflex sympathetic dystrophy, who was told nothing could be done for that. And there is a very specific mechanism that creates that. And this girl had it after she got a surgery, and she had this response, and they told her nothing could be done for it. She's playing basketball right now. Right. Went back to soccer. This is basketball season in Reno, Nevada. She's playing basketball. I know that because we just saw her a couple of weeks ago, and her mother and all that type of stuff was excited. I had the opportunity to observe a patient over the last 3 or 4 months. Fresh out of Ron here. He would be here too. He would be here. But this gentleman fell off. He's 82 years old. He fell off of, he fell, hit his head, massive brain bleed, went through rehab, was doing better, but had hit a wall. When he came in here, he was on a walker, and he was catheterized. He had a bag to where he had to catheterize himself into the urine 6 times a day, if I recall correctly.
Well, he had the bag on at first, and then we went to 6 times a day, and then now.
Okay, so and then he had neurological issues that had been set off by that trauma, and that were, some of them were calmed down by these stimulations and exercises that were created specifically for him and his particular brain abnormality, and I'll use the term pattern. I don't know if that's the type of term I should use, but his specific pattern. I was there when Dr. Gates tried to stimulate his specific injury, and he got worse.
Right.
And I was like, ooh, this is going nowhere fast. And then because of the training of the board certified chiropractic neurologist, Dr. Gates knew and was skilled enough to go to an adjacent area, stimulate that. And there was an immediate change in his ability to stand and walk and so on and so forth. Now, I know this sounds wacky to a lot of you people who just aren't versed in neuroplasticity and in the massive and sometimes remarkably quick changes that can take place in neurology. But this gentleman responded almost immediately within 3 weeks, and you treat him every day. Within 3 weeks, I think he was off his catheter. Is that correct?
He was off the walker.
He was off the walker.
And then it was about 6 weeks, the catheter was removed. His urologist said,
and
don't go there, it's not going to work.
Okay,
take the catheter out, but you're going to have to put it back in. Well, he never had to put it back in.
And the urologist said later?
Yeah, he said, I'm glad you went there.
I'm glad you went there. So we get it. We get that people don't understand it. I don't get as much in functional medicine anymore. 5 or 6, 7 years ago, I get the same thing. Oh, you guys are wacky. You're doctor wannabes. Oh, don't go to those people. They don't know what they're doing. Now that's lightening up. Mainly, I think it started lightening up with Dr. Oz, so I go to a functional medicine doctor. But now people are seeking me out as a functional medicine doctor. I don't know that we're quite to that stage yet in chiropractic neurology. We get patients who call and say, I was told to find a CARIC trained board certified chiropractic neurologist, and that's really nice when they come in, because they've already embraced the fact that we're not quacks here. I think, again, I just want to go back and emphasize the fact that I am overwhelmed at the amount of research that has been put together for both of our disciplines. But
it's beyond thousands. I mean, it's
thousands.
It's tens of thousands.
I say that
hundreds of thousands
because I was looking up this science-based medicine guy who takes pride in calling everybody a quack. And he said, oh, I looked up Ted Carrick on PubMed, and there was nothing there. Well, first of all, his name's Frederick.
That's why.
Second of all, there's about 14, things there. But there's thousands of peer-reviewed research papers in scientific journals that have led to the ability to put together the discipline of chiropractic neurology.
I mean, it's just voluminous. I mean, look at the reading list that is recommended for the American Chiropractic Neurology Board diplomate examination. You'll see volumes of books. That's what we have to read and be fluent with in order to pass the examination. The research as you're discussing, I mean, it all comes from medical research. Yeah. It's all from medical neurological journals. It's all from rehabilitation journals, neuroscience journals. So it's almost laughable when they say it's not research-based. And as Dr. Carrick said in the ABC Nightline News show on him, he said, everything that he's doing comes from other people. And nothing is new, but he has taken that information and basically with his brilliance, I'm going to say it that way, not just to be, I don't know, I'm missing the adjective, not just to make laudatory statements, but really he has taken all these disparate pieces and brought them together into what is now termed functional neurology. What he has crafted is something no one else has thought of. And he said it in the last
Copernicus.
He's Copernicus, yeah.
When Copernicus said, no, I don't think that the sun is traveling around us. I think that we're traveling around the sun. I think his reward for that was dying in prison. After he had begged his friend not to let anybody see his research because he knew that it was not going to go over real well with the powers that be at the time. Carrick's kind of a little bit in that position. Yeah,
very much so. So we're not into titrating medications. We're not into medical neurology. We're into medical neurological diagnosis. We don't want to put you on a med and change the dose. That is what a neurologist goes through their residency for 4 years to figure out how to do. But what we do is taking all of this information and figuring out how to rehab the brain when appropriate. Sometimes it can be done, sometimes it can't. And then rehab the brain, retrain the brain, exercise the brain in its specific pattern to get the person back to function. And then sometimes the results are just stunning. I mean, we had a gal here. I guess we can talk about success stories. She didn't
normally I don't like to talk about success stories, but I do think it would be valuable to do one or two like I just did, just to let these folks know the breadth of potential of their own physiology, their own brain physiology.
Yeah, I agree, because for you skeptical viewers out there, you're going to say, well, it's just placebo. Oh, you just tricked that person. Well, we had a gal here who hadn't walked in 5 years. in a wheelchair, been to Mayo Clinic, been to UCLA.
In her 70s.
Yeah.
A
determined gal. It's not as though she didn't want to walk. She basically, they said, we don't know what's wrong with you. We think you have progressive supranuclear palsy, which is a type of Parkinson's disease where they have bad balance. And we put her through.
Oh, and they removed part of her brain.
Yeah. And then the Mayo Clinic said that was unnecessary. But basically, we put her through some very specific stimulation exercises for the balance center in her brain to retrain her frame of reference for where she is. And she went to walking with a walker. Then she went to walking with a cane. And her neurologist said, this is the most amazing change I've seen in 10 years in one of my patients.
And he did. He was very gracious.
Yeah. And so can that happen for all of our patients? No. And that's why we properly select our patients. Right. We figure out if we can help someone, if we can. If we can't help them, we say, you know, maybe go see one of our other colleagues, go see Dr. Carrick. Because at this point in time, we can't figure this one out. Yeah. But for those we can help, we see some pretty amazing results.
It has a lot to do with the physiology of the patient. Can it respond? What is their physiology? Frankly, their positive mental attitude, are they willing to do things necessary, and or they're too far gone? Are they too far gone?
Yeah.
And so it's not. We're not saying it's a miracle cure for everybody, but this is going to be part of the future at some point in time of chronic pain, chronic conditions, and a substantial portion of. I mean, we do restless leg. Consistently successful results with the restless leg. Peripheral neuropathy, we're writing a book on that. Dizziness, vertigo, and balance. I mean, that's basically what Dr. Carrick and Dr. Gates ultimately cut your teeth on, I would say. Concussions now.
Dr. Carrick's doing
a lot of concussions. We get them. We're not advertising for them, but we get them, and they respond pretty well.
We've had some fantastic.
And they respond pretty well. But not everybody can. I've had multiple concussions myself. I have certainly regained function. I haven't regained all function, but I have regained a lot of function doing this. So it's an interesting from that perspective. You can recruit what's there. You can't recruit what's gone. You can recruit to various degrees depending on the person's physiology, their willingness to work, their willingness to do what needs to be done. Believe it or not, their willingness to maybe change their diet or do things of that nature. So it's really
something else. And I would say for anybody who's skeptical, I mean, if you're really skeptical and if you really want to delve into this issue, go to one of Dr. Carrick's seminars that he instructs, one of his higher level courses. So if you're a medical student, if you're a medical doctor, if you're a neurologist, you should be able to understand what he's saying and go and see for yourself. And I would be shocked, if not willing to bet, that you wouldn't be impressed with his level of knowledge. And at this point, just know that he has several people coming from prestigious academic institutions to see what he is doing. I won't go into any more specifics on that.
Fair enough.
And then we did this broadcast today because a very famous guy came out. I guess I can say it because he talked about Glenn Beck went to one of Dr. Carrick's facilities and got treated and was basically told to go home and die. And now he's back to living a full, vibrant life with his family.
He talked about it on his show a couple weeks ago.
You know, it's nothing against the medical doctors Glenn Beck saw. They have a different paradigm, and the paradigm that Dr. Carrick has created through functional neurology brought Glenn Beck back to life.
And he mentioned that people said, "Oh, this was placebo, and that it's all in your head." They told Sidney Crosby that.
Yeah.
And Crosby said, "Look, I don't care what it is. I'm getting back." But I would say also to the non-medical students, and I don't want to sound like a used car salesman at this point in time, but there's just a lot of people out there that can be helped that have been told they can't. If you're a non-medical student who can't go to Dr. Carrick's courses, you might want to seek out someone like Dr. Gates and our office to get an evaluation and determine for yourself. I would say our calling card is our protocol for screening patients as to whether they're a good candidate or not. And then our exam, consistently our patients tell us, "I've never been examined like this before." And generally, by the time a person's gone through the history and the exam, they kind of get it. And then we also usually will do some treatment to the patient that day to see if their nervous system actually will respond. And by the time we're done with that, we have a pretty good idea whether that patient can respond, approximately what we think it's going to take. Is it going to take 3, 6, 9, 12 months? What's it going to take? What are, that type of thing. Now, and we don't hold people, it's not like, oh, you got to do it. At the end of that period of time, the patient doesn't want to do care, that's fine. It's kind of, it's a way for a person who's wondering if this discipline can help them to, at a very low fee, I might add, to figure out for the consult and for the exam and so on and so forth. I think we charge like $120. And the reason we charge that is because of what we're talking about here. A lot of people are skeptical. The people, their relatives are telling them not to come here. So we just kind of give the person an opportunity to kind of see us and touch us and feel us and make a decision for themselves. And if the person thinks that we don't know what we're doing, fine, that's okay. It's no, you're not going to insult us. We get that there's not a frame of reference for what we do out there. But for the most part, that doesn't happen. And people kind of get it because by the time they get to us, they've already been through all of that. They've already been through rehab. They've already been a neurologist. They're already loaded up with a bunch of medications and so on and so forth. So that's an option for those of you who are skeptical, but maybe you're thinking, oh my goodness, maybe they can help me. Maybe somebody can help me. Like I said, there's 400 chiropractic neurologists all around the country. And frankly, not all of them do what Dr. Gates is doing here, but it's worth investigating. So,
yeah. Okay. And the nice part that's happening is that we're becoming a referral-based practice. And so we have less and less of that skepticism come across. And when it does come across, it's fine because, it's natural to be skeptical. I think that's a good human instinct to question. And people should be able to answer your questions. I think we answered a lot of questions here.
I think we addressed everything that I had hoped we would address relative to the things that I have heard when people come in. Oh, this chiropractic neurologist, my neurologist told me this, and my urinary doctor told me that. We have a pretty good relationship with the cardiologist in town, thanks to your work relative to working with peripheral neuropathy patients who have pacemakers and communicating with them on that. So it's really a nice discipline. It's a very, very well-schooled discipline. The results are consistently successful in the properly selected patients. And so I hope that clears some people up. Some people are going to be skeptical no matter what, but we just thought we'd put this out there so that maybe this discipline could grow a little bit more because frankly, it deserves to.
Mm-hmm. And thanks to Dr. Carrick, we will.
Oh yeah,
and that.
Yep. Dr. Carrick, if you're watching this, you don't know me, but I know you, and you had a huge influence on this office and the patients who have come in here. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we'll end on that note.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for watching.